we go. My apologies. So we are now recording this event for those in the future. And I will start by introducing you to these two fantastic authors we are hosting for the conversation tonight. Warwick's is pleased to host Whitney Pierce as she discusses her new book, Down to the River, in conversation with Susannah Marren. Whitney Pierce is a lifelong Cantabrigian and the author of two books, Galaxy Girls, Wonder Women, which was awarded the 1993 Willa Cather Fiction Prize, and Rainline, which Kirkus Reviews pronounced a lyrical, elegant foray into beauty gleaned from tragedy. While raising her three daughters, she taught writing in the WLP graduate writing program at Emerson College. Tonight, she will share Down to the River, a book which, in the words of author Tom Perrotta, is a deeply absorbing family saga that unfolds in the vicinity of Harvard Square during the turbulence of the late 60s and early 70s. He goes on, Whitney Pierce captures those vanished days, the collapse of the old order, the sexual experimentation, the hovering threat of the war in Vietnam, the uneasy sense that anything might be possible, with uncanny precision and an empathy that does justice to both sides of the generation gap. High praise. She will be joined in conversation by Susannah Marren, who we've also had the pleasure of hosting last year. She joined us to talk about her books, A Palm Beach Wife and a Palm Beach Scandal. And she has also written over a dozen nonfiction books, including Tripping the Prom Queen, Toxic Friends, and I love this one, You're Grounded Forever, but first let's go shopping. For over 20 years, she has taught gender studies at Marymount Manhattan College and has guest taught creative nonfiction at the Writing Institute at Sarah Lawrence College. And she lives in New York City. So before I leave the screen, please do remember to use the Facebook comments to submit any questions. And after Susannah and Anne are done talking, I'll pop back on screen to convey any of those questions. So without further ado, please welcome Whitney Pierce in conversation with Susannah Marren.
Thank you so much. Well, here we are, Anne. And as you know, I'm a big fan of your novel. I found it emotional, touching, historical, beautifully written, hard to put down, and really something that, you know, we all need to remember, which is that the 60s was the most turbulent decade, really, of the 20th century. And I wanted to ask you, what made you choose this era to write about?
Well, it was an absolute no-brainer for me because I lived it. You know, I came of age. If you think about the 4 years that I spent in high school, which was the fall of 1967 to the spring of 1971, if you just think about what transpired during those 4 years in the political world, and this, you know, the social cultural shifts, sexual experimentation, gender issues, it's unprecedented. You know, I'm sure a historian would correct me and you know, direct me back to the Middle Ages or some era that I'm not familiar with, but it was truly extraordinary time to be coming of age. And I was very interested in the family and how the family dynamic shifted during this time, among other, you know, not only on the social cultural level, but within the family as well. And if you think that, you know, I was born in 1953, and so the first 7 or 8 years of my life, you know, are pre-Kennedy, pre-Cuban Missile Crisis, just sort of la-di-da-di-da, you know, and then all of a sudden, you know, you hit the age of 12, 13, and it's, you know, all hell is breaking loose on every, you know, different kind of sphere that you can imagine. And what interested me so much was how the rules within the family, particularly, all sort of just drifted away. all of a sudden, all of these things that have been drilled into you, these sort of 50s values, were not apparently relevant anymore. And I think as kids, we sort of looked at each other with this interesting, double feeling of, that is so great. How wonderful, we get all this freedom. And yet, on the other hand, are you kidding me? Kind of thing. But it became our norm. And I can't speak for other people, but I know a lot of people who've agreed with me, is that all of a sudden we were sort of on our own. Nobody was really keeping tabs on us. Anything was sort of encouraged. It was just completely different. And that's why I gave these two teenage characters some older siblings who had experienced their adolescence and their leaving home in such a different manner, because they would come home and see what was happening with the two younger kids and just,
Well, let's talk actually, and let's talk a little about families. And you make the point that they are changing as the world changes and the expectations and the rules. But this family was very clannish, and the twins at the center of the novel are definitely products of a different time, and they've lived part of their life where male supremacy was not questioned, and they come from a certain kind of family. So, why don't we talk a little about how you structured the twin brothers and, really the fallout from there, but no spoilers.
No, I know. I have to be careful about that.
Yeah.
Well, it's first important to say that this is not my family. I gave a reading and my brother and my sister were there, and I had them vouch for that. It truly is a fictional family, but it's definitely a family that I've known, that I could have known, had friends who had this sort of, the idea of twins is just always very interesting to me. I think it's a little bit of a cop out for writers, because it gives you that opportunity to, do a little experiment about two people who are raised, in not only, sharing the womb, but sharing a life, and then can turn out quite differently. But the more important relationship, without spoiling anything, the twins are, come from a, wealthy Brahmin Boston family generations back. Everybody goes to Harvard without any question, without any necessary qualifications. That's just the way it is. And so when we meet these twins, that veneer that they have, just has always been their way of life is starting to chip away. And they actually have to go out and get jobs, which is something they never had to do. So they start a sporting goods store. So it was just sort of a natural choice for me that here were these two brothers, and this is where, as a writer, you kind of orchestrate that they would have these late in life kids, and that they would be first cousins and kind of comrades, as all the older siblings were gone, and they were raised virtually as single children, and they really had each other to count on. And so that was an interesting relationship, as I think the cousin relationship is. I know for me, I was very close to my cousins, and it's a relationship that's, doesn't come with all the baggage of your siblings and, mom and dad and all that, but it's your family, and you feel that. You definitely feel that.
I think in your book, there's some kind of magic about the connection. There's this energy and synergy and bonding. And again, we don't want to spoil the novel because we want everyone to read it, but it really, the way that you set it up is really an intriguing notion. And so in many ways, this is also a coming of age novel.
Yeah.
And I think that, so you really have a multi-generational story here. I was also very interested in the wives. Yeah. And, the sisters-in-law. So, Remy and Nash, the twins, these are their wives. And they have had so much power just by virtue of being born male and privileged. and their wives have really had to be acrobatic. And so there's a lot of awakening in this novel.
Mhm.
We see a lot of different um, different truths that that need to be faced, and that's what gives it so much depth. So let's talk about the importance of your characters being sympathetic,
Yeah.
because as a reader, and I think this will be true for all your readers, we will be drawn to certain storylines.
Yeah, of course. And that's the question I grapple with. How how important is that, to have your characters be likable or
Mhm.
pleasing on some level? I am. I think not. I do not think that's a requirement for all characters. I think if you have a, a novel that's full of unlikable characters, that's not going to be as successful. But that's a very subjective view. you know my hope was, I understood that these parents were tough. It was going to be sort of tough, for people to feel sympathy with them. But I'm glad to hear you say that, in reading about the plight of the wives, that spoke to you. And maybe it's because we're of a similar age that, it did. But I do feel that, had the 60s not happened, these women's lives might never have changed, and they might just have sort of drifted into oblivion. It was the sort of the kick of that 60s energy, and having, those late in life kids and saying, damn it, I'm not doing that again that way. It's going to be different this time. And so that was interesting. And as I said when we spoke before, I feel a little bit, I wish I could have given more time to the wives, because sometimes I feel like, well, I sort of, describe their situation and then, don't follow up on it. But everybody was experimenting and doing their thing. And it was as if, I often felt this way too with my own mother, is that everybody decided it was time to, whether or not you'd gone through adolescence or not, it was time to do it again.
Well, yeah, and let's talk about the mother-daughter bond. Again, we don't want to give away the storylines, but that's also very significant in this novel, particularly when, since you just mentioned it, when there is so much going on for each generation.
Yeah.
Because the mother-daughter bond is complex, no matter when you're born or will be born. And there's the question of loyalty, and then what is your belief system for your daughter and for yourself. And we don't want to be hypocrites as mothers, but we want to set a standard. So let's talk for a minute about just what, how you decided to take that storyline in your novel.
That on. Well, as a mother of three daughters myself, I'm interested in families that don't have a male child, because that was my experience. And, sort of the cultural issues around that, when I was, proudly taking my three daughters around, people would always stop me and say, are you going to try for the boy? And I'd say, no, we're good. We really have a good family here. So Violet, who's this very complicated, on some levels, very strong, confident woman, is plagued by the fact that she didn't have a son, and yet she's smart and she's tough. So she wants all of her girls to be strong and resilient. But it's kind of, it's not it's not enough. The girls, I think, can really believe it. It's just because she's super critical as well, so she's not really nurturing them. And, I just found that, when we were growing up, boys, they just got a pass. Like, it was just the way it was, boys would be boys, and that was that. And, girls and women were always held to this these standards of being the one who care about everybody and like everybody and be nice to everybody. And I just, I used to tell my friends, my daughters, you don't have to have one best friend. You can have lots of best friends. I know I'm veering off a little bit on the.
Well, let's talk. Well, actually, let's talk about the role of wife, because based on my own research, and definitely in your novel depicted so, I thought, so perfectly, the role of wife was really changing because the societal messaging was changing, and it was a decade of unrest.
Yes.
And so I think that the way that you took a look at the wives of Remy and Nash, the two wives, the two women, really exemplified the struggles, waking up and the price we pay to wake up. Waking up can be as
Yeah.
painful as being
Yeah.
asleep.
Yeah.
And
That's
so,
right.
and so
Yeah.
we see this in the novel, and I think it was a very tricky time for women, for females of all ages, definitely teenagers, but also for young wives.
Well, I think harder. I mean, I really, I know people always say what happens, and all I can say is Chicky, who's the female protagonist. Chicky's going to be fine. She learned a lot from this, and she's strong, and she'll be all right. But I think some of these women, they just never figured it out. Never had everything that it took to really pull out of that the holes they've been dug into for so long. And I feel it makes me so sad, for women of a certain generation who just didn't seem to be able to do it.
Well, we know it's a long history of women having a real voice, right? So
Yeah.
I think that in this book, it's so visceral, the story, that we really feel the struggles, the pain, even the ambivalence. So just, shifting a bit, I wondered how long it took you to write this book, and did you have many drafts?
Millions and trillions.
Really?
Oh yeah, it was from the beginning. It was very ambitious, and believe it or not, it used to be twice as long, and it's not a short, because I had this initial idea that I would have the family and a whole nother set of characters, which I won't go into, and how their lives intertwined. I had an agent at the time who was trying to help me to sell this voluminous, novel, and kind of midway through the process said, I really think this is just, it's too much, it's too much for the reader. Your family is suffering because of the attention you give these other characters who aren't as strong. And she made a good case for that. So I agreed to do that. And I spent, at least a year just painstakingly pulling the threads apart, and which was, tedious and discouraging. And, but in the end, it was a tighter novel, and the focus was clearer. And I think it was a better book after that. So I was grateful for that. However, she then went on to try and sell it and was not successful at that time. So, the answer to how long did it take me, and in actual, writing time, which is not very linear at all, but a bunch of years, several years, 6 or 7 years probably. So from first draft to another, and millions of drafts. I wish I could.
Right. So do you think that the most difficult part for writing this particular novel was the paring down of story? Were you able to save some of your characters for another book? I mean, writers,
Yeah.
I think it's worth talking about for a moment, because I think for readers, there's that luxury of just getting right into the story. But for the writer, there have been so many decisions made about what to preserve and what to maybe put on a shelf, shall we say. Yeah.
Well, and if anything, I know that I have a tendency to write too much. That's always been something I struggle against. The only writing teacher I ever had suggested that I just delete the last sentence of every paragraph. She thought that might improve.
What a technique.
Well, I mean, it was tongue in cheek in a way, but she was making a point. And
Well, so
and-
this is, I love to watch virtual events, and before COVID for certain. And again, we pray. Going to hear, writers speak is like a thrill. And so often the question, and so I must include it, is, are you someone who plots your novel very carefully? Or do the characters just live in your mind and you get to your computer and you say, what would she do today? Or do you have a very specific plan for your
I'm
character?
not specific at all. I've never done an outline. Usually a character begins the initial idea. Sometimes it's language, sometimes just a phrase or something that gets me going. But it's very much as it goes kind of proposition for me. And it's corny, but I do find, the more I write, and you're an old pro. I've looked at some of what you've done now, and you've written so many books, but I have not. In terms of that, the characters, it's a great moment as a writer when you really do create a fictional character who starts to exist on his or her own terms, and that you're not feeding lines to it or saying, well, I remember I said that, that's kind of a good line, or, where the characters really do sort of make their presence known and their voices known. And I love that, and I can think of an example without giving it away of a scene between the mom and one of the daughters where, it was a heavy conversation, and I sort of, as a writer, you have to decide how am I going to end this scene, and the way it ended was not anywhere near how it would have ended with me and my mother at that time, for an example, because I said, no, clearly this Chicky, I'm not Chicky, we all know that, but I think Chicky really might have had this reaction. And so that's great, that's wonderful when that happens. But no plotting, no, sorry, I'm not good at that.
I think there are two ways that writers go. Either they're very detailed in
Yes.
terms of the plotting and character and write reams about the book before they start, or they just are, as people say, organic, which is what you are just.
It's a little, I mean, I always wished I had the comfort of a nice outline, but I just don't think that way. I never have,
Well,
it works
there's
better.
certainly a lot of plot and character, so it worked
Well,
out.
that's good. That's not something I often hear, so I really like to hear that, because
It's
a lot of
very
people,
rich,
yeah,
very
okay.
rich, Anne.
Okay. Well,
So did you research, I know you're from Cambridge, and you started tonight by saying that the 60s so well, growing up in the 60s, but how did you research the topic? Did you do some research on all of the social change and mores, the Vietnam War and the civil rights marches?
Well, I certainly looked through, sort of the cheat notes of to get the biggest problem was chronology, was remembering what happened when, because so much happened. So you wanted to have, for instance, the draft is an issue in this book, and during this time they reinstated the draft with a lottery system, so that for just a few years it was a completely random lottery based on your birth date. And you sort of would open the paper and say, okay, my birthday is this, and that means I'm number 20 on the list. And then, they say numbers 1 through 30 might be called and had to go. So this is a real threat for my brother, for instance. He drew a very, I don't know whether you want to say high or low, but a good number. He was safe because they would never get that far in calling. But those kinds of details were really important. But in terms of, I live in Harvard Square. I can throw a stone to Harvard Square. I mean, those details and the places and the feelings and the colors and the voices are extremely vivid in my mind still to this day. And so
And in your book, Anne,
What?
In your book, they come to life.
Oh,
It's
good.
so visceral.
Oh,
We
good.
really
Good. That's a
feel
good.
that it's a character. The place is a character
That's
in the
wonderful.
novel,
Yeah.
and that really adds another depth. You know, it really makes the reader keep going, because
Good.
it's, you know, you say it's so familiar to you, but not to all of us, and so
Right.
that's also
Right.
another component.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, do you think that that male supremacy, again, I don't want to give away your novel, but that male supremacy is, there's so much about it, even if it's subtextual in this novel.
Mhm.
The idea that women are subjugated, and so when you talk about twins, we're really doubling this sense of power that these brothers have always had. It's really fascinating. And, you know, again, we don't want to give away what happens to them, but it's almost a metaphor for what was really going on in society, and the shape shifting of values and times and privilege.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so as a woman writer, speaking to a woman writer, what made you choose to write about two men? As you know, to really, I thought of that from the beginning, and I just wanted to
Yeah.
ask you.
Well, they had to be there for me to make my points about and for the women, I think. I suppose people will think, were they the genesis of this? But they weren't. I knew that everything that I was going to put forward in the novel was going to be a response to the way that they had grown up, and that they were, you know, that they were men. And so, you know, they sort of were the bulwark, what's that word, bulwark, of the novel on some level. But to me, they weren't as interesting. You know, I didn't want them to take over. I just, I wanted to see them both kind of coming a little bit to terms with the patriarchy, and, you know, sort of all the wrongs that have been done over the centuries, and, you know, how it affected their families, and you know, what kinds of things they before might not have thought anything about, but now had to, you know, give a little bit of thought to. So I don't see that they made a whole lot of progress, frankly, during the course of the novel.
No, they don't.
Yeah.
But it's a notable way to spin a story. And I found it very effective, because in reading about them, I thought so much about how women are positioned in society. And I believe that that was your goal, really,
Yeah.
to show how what comes to women have so much strength, but, you know, being put to the test in different ways. Again, I'm being so careful because I don't want to give anything away.
No, but you said it much more eloquent. I did. Thank you. Yes,
Yeah,
that's
no, I mean, it's really striking. And that brings me to a question, because you've layered this in such a fine way. What would you advise a young writer who's watching tonight, and, or, you know, is struggling, and perhaps you could be their teacher in some world because you teach writing? What would your advice be to someone with this ambition to get a book out there, a novel out?
Well, it's sort of old school, a lot of it. It's part of sort of, I guess, you know, I was raised as a, you know, privileged waspy kid, and there's some horrible aspects of that, but there are also some good old fashioned sort of, you know, stick to it, you know, stick to your guns, have faith in what you do, don't listen to, you know, the naysayers, and really give it a good shot. You know, if you're going to crumble every time somebody doesn't like what you read, it's going to be really hard to keep moving on it. You know, so tough skin, I think, is pretty critical. And also to let you if it's too miserable, you know, that's not going to work either. I always made a deal with myself that this was not going to rule, you know, my my way of living life and feeling good about myself or my life. I wasn't going to be, on this up and down roller coaster of, it was accepted, it was rejected. I would hate for any young person to sort of take that on. I think if you love what you're doing, do it often. I think you be aggressive in terms of, sending stuff out if that's really what you want, keep at it. Don't get discouraged. Also, I think writing groups can be very helpful. I think if you, not only to hear what other people have to say, because if, 4 out of 6 people in your writing group are reading a scene and really telling you for what seem to be pretty good reasons, this scene just isn't working for whatever reasons, that's good to know. But it was also helpful for me because I would take the comments back. Whoops.
You're still there.
Oh, okay, I lost you.
Oh, you did?
I lost my picture. I don't know what to do. I think I'd better just keep talking.
Keep talking. You can still hear me, right?
I can, yeah.
Oh, good. Okay.
So anyway, just to finish that up, that kids should also, and not kids, anybody, be able to take those comments and go home and read them and reread the work and say, I hear that it was a popular opinion about this, but I don't agree. I know why I put that paragraph in there, and it's important to the work, and I'm clear on that. So, it's sort of how I would tell anybody to take life on, take it on with gusto and, the love of it, and just, get it out there.
So this is really good advice because we both know that writing is not for the faint of heart.
No, that's very well put. Yes.
Right. And so we do know that. Well, let's see. I'm thinking maybe if there's some questions for you that we could open it up if Amanda has access to them. Amanda, are there any questions?
We have more a comment that I'd like to convey from Barbara L. Wallovan.
Okay.
Just finished reading this book yesterday. I loved it. Love your writing style. Even relationships between women were strained. They could have supported each other. I don't know if this is a spoiler. They could have supported each other if they were true friends.
Okay, that's fair enough.
And then, she did submit a question. So Barbara asks, I find secondary characters fascinating and love to hear an author's take on them. Do you have a favorite secondary character in this book? If so, what makes them special?
Oh, what a great question. I guess I would have to say Nash, who is the father of daughters, all daughters, Chicky's dad, because of all the men in the book, I was trying to cheer him on a bit because he had a good heart, even though there were all of these hardwired patriarchal kind of problems. I think, I sort of wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt more than not. And I liked his good heart. So I think I'll go with Nash.
Barbara, if you have a favorite secondary character, let us know there in the comments.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
Amanda, I just want to say, I don't know if you know, but I lost my video. So I'm just talking off the cuff here.
We can see you. We can see you. That's okay. What we all came to see.
Okay, fine. That's fine.
Sorry, okay. You're talking into the void. You're
okay. That's void. Okay. I don't mind.
It's sort of like writing, right?
Yes, exactly. I'm used to it.
I had a couple of quick questions. And first I want to say, Susannah, what a beautifully conducted interview. Thank you.
Yes.
I love that you asked. Yeah. I love that you asked the perennial plotter or pantser question. That is one. So I was curious, just in general, Anne, why this book now? Why? Because it has been a little while since your last book.
Yeah.
What moved you?
Nothing moved me. This is called Twist of Fate,
Mm.
because I didn't write this book, many years ago thinking, well, I'll just kind of let it sit around and, gel for a little while. It's really just coincidence that you know how slow the wheels of publishing, the whole process is very slow. So it's just actually a coincidence that this comes out exactly 50 years from some of the dates that well, it's actually 51 now, but some of it was ongoing. So, I mean, what could be better in terms of, having interest in a book, because a lot of the issues that I address and take on and describe are coming full circle now, and, I don't want to get into politics here, but to me, it's just I'm in despair. I really am, to have lived, long enough now to see how these cycles of history come and go around. And, I hope that the book will get people talking about some of the issues again. That would be great if that was an outcome.
Barbara said she enjoyed Chicky.
Okay.
The spunk and determination was awesome.
That's great.
And James has a question.
Okay.
Do you have a general idea of where your story is going to go before you write it, or does it evolve as you do so? This is a little bit tied to the Pantser plotter. Thank you so much for your presentation today, and also can't wait to grab your book.
Oh, thank you so much, James. That's nice. Yeah, I think I am more of the just let's see how the dice roll, and as I was saying before, let's let some of the characters make their own decisions. That being said, I think, clearly I did have the basic arc of the novel. I think I would have felt a little unmoored if you do want some kind of anchoring in your, your psyche, so that you're not going crazy with indecision about what's going to happen. But so you have sort of touch points, I would say, along the way, and then some interesting stuff can happen along the way, which is really fun. That's one of the funner parts of writing, in my idea, because some of it's really not that fun. It's a lot of hard work, like anything else, like anything else. So.
Do you mind me asking about the beautiful cover art? Did you have a hand in the art or the design?
I did not, but I am so thankful. The press that accepted this book makes those decisions. They, you can offer a little bit of, they have a little, questionnaire kind of thing. And, what sort of metaphors or visual metaphors might be appropriate for the book. And so the river, which is where we spent a lot of time as teenagers, and I still do. I was down there today walking on the riverbanks, was, to me, maybe the most obvious visual for the book. And the designer just sent it to me, and I was so pleased. I was waiting to see what was going to happen. I think if you go to the website of the press, you'll see they really have some beautiful, beautiful books. I look forward to seeing them and reading more. But I feel lucky. Yeah.
Excuse me. Before we wrap up, I do want to ask one question that I think that your audience would appreciate. What sort of books do you read, and what do you seek out in a novel?
Well, traditionally, I'm the one who likes the longest novel you can find, the one I can spend the most time getting lost in. So, in college and whatnot, I loved the Brontes and Jane Austen, and then I majored in French literature in college. So I read Zola and Flaubert, and I just, Dostoevsky, you name it. That's sort of the kind of thing that I've always gravitated to. Some recent wonderful books, A Little Life by Yana Hanagihara. I don't know if you've read that. It's fabulous. Also, Middlesex by Jeffrey Eugenides. He's the writer who wrote The Virgin Suicides. Jennifer Egan is a writer who I'm very impressed with. And But I do go back to the classics a lot. I find them very comforting, and, I'm amazed every time I go back, how they stand the test of time. And although you don't really take notes on that, you get a sense of, what you would like in your own book for it to be that, worthy over time. That's a goal, because I think those timeless stories are really the ones that interest me the most.
Well, thank you. I think that's a wonderful way to wrap up. If we have no other questions, Amanda, are we all good?
Oh, we're good. Just a lot of love in the chat. And one more question for both of you. Are you on social media? And how can people follow both of you if you have a preferred social media outlet?
Well, I'll go first because I don't have much. I do have a website, which is my name spelled out, and whitneypierce.com. And I try and keep it updated with new reviews and events. I had no social media credentials, but I did most recently get on Instagram. So I am there in wobbly form so far, but I'm getting the hang of it. So, and my name for that is again just Ann Whitney Pierce. So love to hear from everybody, anybody. I have my contact information on the website. Be great to hear from anybody. And I know Susan has a lot of options, which is great.
Well, I have a website. It's under Susannah Marren or Susan Shapiro Barish, which is my real name for my nonfiction, and then in real life. And I am on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, and I do love to follow authors. And so I'm going to start following you, Anne, the minute we get off tonight.
Me too. It's a deal.
That would be really fun.
Yeah,
and I think it's a good thing for authors to do.
Yeah, I do too. It's high time that I got off my my butt and did at least got on Instagram. And maybe, who knows where I'll go from there. But
I lied. I have one more question for both of you, because this is something that not only us booksellers love to ask, but the audience is always curious too. If you're working on anything new, if there's anything in the pipeline, are you working on anything, either of you, right now?
Yeah, well, I was telling Susannah yesterday, I actually have another book that I, during the pandemic, finished, pretty much finished. So after this it all calms down a bit, I'm going to try and get that out. It's more of my attempt at writing a more commercial novel. Susannah, I think I have to talk to you more about that. But anyway, it's my bid to sort of write a more of a upbeat, more lighthearted novel. I like to think there's a little humor in Down to the River, but it's pretty dark on a lot of levels. So that's what I'm kind of working on right now.
Life is dark.
It's dark, but I want to see the light so badly. I do. Just a few rays, give us something, please.
And Susannah?
I have a reissue of my nonfiction book, A Passion for More, about affairs, about why women have affairs. And that is coming out in September, or I think maybe October 1st.
Nice.
And I'll be doing a virtual tour, at least for that.
Oh.
And I just handed in a new novel. So I don't have a pub date yet.
Wow, fantastic.
Congratulations, that's wonderful.
Cool.
Thank you.
Busy.
Yeah.
Thank you both so much. This was an excellent conversation. And again, if anyone came in late, this will be on Facebook and on YouTube for your enjoyment at any point later on. So we're going to say good night, and please visit warwicks.com, and you can see in the comments here, the link to get Down to the River from Warwicks, or your favorite independent bookstore. You can get it anywhere books are sold. So again, thank you both. Good night. We're going to close the virtual doors and get reading.
Okay. Thank you so much. And
both of
I
you.
wish you so much success.
Oh.
Thank you so much, Susan, for being willing to talk with me It's been a pleasure. I'm really looking forward to reading more of your work and getting to know you better. So thanks again. And Amanda, thanks for handling this so
Thank you,
beautifully.
Amanda.
Our pleasure. Our pleasure. Good
Okay.
night.
Good night.
Bye-bye.